Hello everyone, welcome back to SFF180. Thomas here, your host, as always. And it's been a really good day over here. I hope it has been for you. Now, I know Daily Shorts has not been a series that I have been keeping up with as well as I intentionally planned. It's nothing to do with a lack of popularity. These videos have been doing as well as my regular novel reviews, but I suppose it was much more ambitious an undertaking than I initially anticipated. Still, it has gotten me reading much more SFF short fiction than I usually do in a given year, and for that I'm grateful. So my plan is that I'm just going to keep it up through the end of the year, hopefully with a tad more frequency, but we'll just have to see. This episode is specifically going to cover the remaining 7 stories that are 2018 Hugo Award finalists in the Novelette and Short Story categories that I have not already reviewed in earlier episodes of Daily Shorts. I gotta say, qualitatively they are all over the map. Starting with the Novelettes, a series of stakes by Veena G-Man Prasad is a suspenseful and absorbing story whose entire aesthetic is reminiscent of, but not derivative of, classic cyberpunk, with a premise that feels wholly original. Our heroine is Helena Lee, who lives within the gray areas of the law in a future Nanjing, and her specialty is designing and 3D printing forged cuts of meat that are of such high quality they are indistinguishable from the real thing. Now, though it is never quite spelled out, presumably this is a meat-scarce future where restaurateurs are willing to do whatever it takes to bring such a high-status product to their customers. Helena is contacted by an anonymous blackmailer who knows about some shady business in her past and who demands a massive order of T-bone steaks, one that is practically impossible to fill from a technical standpoint, in exchange for not ratting her out to certain parties that would happily see her hang. Helena takes on an employee, Lily, and the two of them race against time to both fulfill the blackmailer's order and track down his identity. There was so much to enjoy here. The world building has that definite future noir feel, and I love the way Helena and Lily's friendship developed believably, and also in ways that established more about the various subcultures in the story's future. Helena is sympathetic because she isn't really to blame for her troubles, and even though I had a bone to pick with the way Lily is perhaps a little too manic pixie, a little too good at pretty much everything she sets her mind to, she is still likable as all hell. I really want to see more stories with these two characters. I want a novel with these two characters. So if you love gritty urban futures and wounded heroes who have to live in the shadows, don't miss this one. Next up, Children of Thorns, Children of Water by Aliette de Bedard is set in the alternate history fantasy world of her Dominion of the Fallen series, between the events of the 2 novels House of Shattered Wings and House of Binding Thorns. Now, the series deals with a massive magical war that rocks the city of Paris and leaves several noble houses fighting for control of the city, and there are angels and dragons and all kinds of cool stuff. Frankly, this novelette is a bizarre choice to find on the Hugo shortlist. Not because it isn't good, it's perfectly good and written with consummate craft, but because it will be incomprehensible to anyone who hasn't read at least the first book in the series and retains a fairly good grasp of the series' mythology. Simply put, it just doesn't work as a standalone, nor as an introduction to the series for new readers. Now, if you're already a fan, feel free to add a star to my rating, but if you're not, well, then reading this will feel like you've started watching a Netflix show at Season 2, Episode 6. Small Changes Over Long Periods of Time by K.M. Sparza may well be this year's most contentious novelette. It's a difficult story to take in, which wasn't helped for me by the fact that it's vampire erotica, a genre I do not get on with, to say the least. But it has hints of intriguing futurist world building, and it's definitely a deeply personal tale, almost disconcertingly personal. The story involves Finley, a young transgender man who is bitten, rather forcibly, by a vampire at a nightclub, and then must deal with the emotional and physical ramifications of turning into a vampire himself. It takes place in the expected, gritty urban fantasy setting, where vampires are just a known quantity in society, and there are laws and even governmental departments set up to regulate vampirism, such as the conditions under which vampires can and cannot legally turn humans. Now that was interesting. And the author holds absolutely nothing back in depicting Finley's trauma, which, as you might have guessed, is presented as a metaphor for gender transitioning. Now, I have no doubt this story will hit home very profoundly with readers who belong to the trans community, but then there's also a great deal of explicit sex, which you might find off-putting, depending on your taste. And I was a bit bothered that the assault aspect of the story wasn't dealt with more. Andreas, the vampire who turns Finley, completely forced himself on Finley, but then immediately commits to taking Finley in and helping with his finances and the agonizing biological changes that are involved in turning. And while Andreas is never quite forgiven, the story never felt like it gave sufficient moral weight to what he did, which was essentially an act of rape. So this is provocative, emotionally raw storytelling, to put it mildly, written from a deeply personal place, but I advise approaching with caution, if you approach at all. Next we have Extracurricular Activities, a prequel story set in the Machineries of Empire universe by Yoon-Ha Lee. Now this one is really a mixed bag. On the one hand, I would have to say that anyone still mulling over whether or not to pick up the novels will almost certainly find this story an easier first read by Lee than Nine Fox Gambit itself, which hurls you right into the technical exoticism of its calendrical science without any kind of a primer. So you'll certainly find the books an easier go if you start here. On the other hand, the story, even though it stars the absolutely likable Hugos Jadao in a tale from his early special ops career, is pretty underwhelming from a plot standpoint, content to be propelled by a droll sense of humor more than anything like rising tension. I mean, the humor is fine, don't get me wrong, and it helps to take some of Jadao's rough edges off. But in this story, which has him infiltrating an enemy station to see what became of a missing friend he knew from his academy days, Jadao just seems to walk through what ought to be a much more dangerous mission. I mean, I know I expressed admiration for his leadership skills in my Hopeful Books tag video, but here he just seems hyper-competent, facing an enemy force made up entirely of lazy dimwits who put little effort into resisting him, and whose ultimate political goals are so hazy that there seems little point to a shocking twist reveal near the climax. So, as a story, this one was disappointing, for sure. But, as a way to get your feet wet for some much better stories, acceptable. Thus, Secret Life of Bots by Suzanne Palmer was a delight. It's set aboard a crumbling, decrepit spacecraft that's been taken out of mothballs in a desperate last-ditch attempt to defend humanity against an implacable alien foe. A pest control problem on board causes the ship to boot up Bot 9, one of its oldest maintenance units, and as Bot 9 learns more about the situation they are in and how hopeless the outcome looks, it proves to be a lot more clever about problem solving than anticipated. If you like cute robot stories, this is definitely for you. Bot 9 is just the best little bot. I really enjoyed the story's light tone, and the clever way the author executed the classic solve the problem trope that has long been associated with kind of old school science fiction magazines like Analog, you know, the stories they used to publish. Also, I can actually see this one turned into a really good Pixar short. Finishing up with the two nominated short stories I have yet to review, Sun, Moon, Dust by Ursula Vernon is a gentle and funny fantasy about turning swords into plowshares. A simple young farmer boy, Alpa, is given a magic sword by his dying grandmother, a sword that contains 3 trapped warrior spirits. When Alpa draws the blade, they appear. Dust is the most aggressive of the 3 spirits and tries hard to whip Alpa into warrior shape through sword training. But Alpa is a kind and content soul who has literally no interest in being a warrior and sees no particular need to prove his manhood by swinging a sword all over the place. He is completely content to spend all his days nursing his potato garden. He's kind of like a hobbit. Dust is baffled and frustrated by this, but Moon takes a liking to the boy's innately peaceful nature. The story has such charm and wit, largely because it's a deconstruction of the age-old epic fantasy trope of the humble farm boy who must rise to meet his warrior hero destiny, while managing not to be mean-spirited in its rebuttal of that trope. It also has some witty lines that indicate Ursula Vernon might be paying homage to the late great Terry Pratchett here. And the final story this week is nothing less than a masterpiece. Carolyn Yoakum's Carnival IX is a poignant, allegorical, three-hanky weeper about parenthood and family, and it explores themes of disability and responsibility. It takes place imaginatively in a world of clockwork people who are constructed from used parts and whose mainsprings only have so many turns of the key before they wear down and break completely. Z is restless in her hometown of Closet City, living with her papa like so many restless kids in stories. She runs off to join the traveling circus, where she meets a boy, Vale, with whom she falls in love and will eventually build a child. But their boy, Matten, is malfunctioning from the start, unable to speak or walk, with a damaged mainspring that will only have very few turns. Vale leaves, disappointed in his broken son, and Z is left alone to carry Matten and care for him, even though it costs her extra energy and wears down her own mainspring to do it. Carolyn Yoakum's level of care in constructing this fanciful world and making it kind of dreamlike and yet entirely believable is nothing short of gifted. But the real masterstroke here is in her use of the character's mainsprings to illustrate so many ideas, not just all about how we age and how the years of our lives seem shorter as we get older, but also about how some days we're up and some days we're down, and how the sacrifices we choose either to make or reject impact us. And while I'm not in a position to speak from experience on the disability rep, the way Yoakum examines the conflicted emotions of a parent felt to me deeply sensitive. And the story's final paragraph might well be the most on-point and eloquent statement on the human condition science fiction has seen since Ray Bradbury was in his heyday. And if Carnival IX takes home the rocket ship, and it is getting my vote in this category, it will be richly deserved. And there you have it. Now I suppose we'll see which of these emerge victorious on Hugo night. I want to thank all of you for watching, and check down below, because all of these stories can be read online, and so you will find the links there. Otherwise, if you enjoyed watching, please leave a like, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe if you haven't done so. That is how SFF180 grows as a channel. You can also support the channel at my TeePublic store and at my Patreon, where recruits into Wank's Army get little perks like getting to see some of these videos the night before. I want to thank all of those amazing folks for their $2 a month. Much, much, much appreciated. I want to thank all of you guys for being the best viewers on BookTube. And until I see you all next time, happy reading.